It did not arrive with a flash or a tremor or a sign. It was simply a sudden, universal drop in pressure. At precisely 4:12 p.m., the sound of the world was instantly severed, as if a master cable had been cut. In the first 60 seconds, the silence was not understood as a tragedy. It was assumed to be a stroke. Millions of hands reached for millions of ears, checking for blockages, tapping temples, searching for a pulse. But the failure was not biological in the individual. It was a sudden, collective numbness of the species. Then came the immediate physical friction of a world built entirely on acoustic warning systems. Within 5 minutes, the first major systemic failures occurred in the sky. Pilots stared at radio dials that spun in perfect, uncooperative silence, their headsets transmitting nothing but dead air. Without verbal coordination, the complex dance of global airspace collapsed into blind survival. On the ground, the simple act of driving became a lethal gamble of visual reaction times. Sirens blared from emergency vehicles, their lights spinning, but their warning was entirely invisible to the deafened crowds. By hour 3, the concept of public transit had evaporated as subway tunnels became dark, silent traps. Passengers abandoned stalled carriages, walking along the tracks in a quiet, single-file pilgrimage toward the light. In the heavy industries, where safety relied on the pitch of a turbine or the hiss of a valve, the danger was absolute. Workers could not hear the pressure build, they could only watch the physical expansion of metal. By the 6th hour, the first localized industrial explosions shook chemical corridors, entirely unannounced by sirens. The absence of sound stripped away the warning, leaving only the sudden visual violence of the impact. As night fell on day 1, the domestic sphere began to warp under the pressure of isolation. Families sat in their living rooms, staring at one another, unable to bridge the sudden gap with their voices. The spoken word was suddenly dead, a useless motor habit of the tongue and throat. By midnight, the global communication networks began to choke on the sudden surge of visual traffic. Every human being who could write was trying to send a message, trying to find out if the silence was global. The confirmation came not from official news, but from the synchronized, quiet terror of billions. By the 12th hour, the financial markets closed early, paralyzed by the inability to conduct floor trades. The frantic hand gestures of traders had lost their meaning when the prices they represented no longer had a voice to back them. As dawn broke on day 2, the physical realities of survival began to assert themselves. Water treatment facilities, relying on acoustic flow meters, began to experience massive back pressure. Without maintenance alerts, clean water distribution began to fail in major metropolitan sectors. In the hospitals, the crisis was immediate and absolute. Intensive care units became vaults where life support monitors flashed red but generated no sound to summon aid. Medical professionals worked by sight alone, tracking the physical rise and fall of chests, reading the visual architecture of failing organs. By the 24th hour, the global supply chain suffered its first major structural break. Freight trains, traveling without trackside auditory signals or verbal dispatch, grinded to a halt at rural crossings. The networks that fed the cities were frozen, locked in place by the sudden absence of their acoustic nervous system. By hour 30, the first widespread public panics manifested not through rioting, but through mass migration. People fled the dense urban high-rises, terrified of the silent concrete canyons where help could never hear a call. In the rural sectors, the silence was absolute, heavy, and deeply unsettling to those accustomed to the ambient noise of life. The wind still bent the grass, and the rain still struck the roofs, but the physical world had lost its texture. Humanity had entered a state of sensory exile, marooned inside the cage of their own thoughts. By the 36th hour, the first primitive systems of visual language began to emerge on the streets. Chalk, paint, and mirrors became the primary tools of governance, replacing the broadcast microphone. Information traveled only as fast as a flag could wave or a signal fire could be spotted. The speed of human civilization dropped by centuries in the span of a single weekend. By hour 40, the psychological weight of the silence began to break the fragile architecture of the mind. The human brain, starved of auditory input, began to manufacture its own noise, hallucinations of phantom bells and distant roars. People locked themselves in dark rooms, trying to escape the internal din of a mind left without an anchor. As the 42nd hour approached, the institutional authority of governments suffered a quiet, total dissolution. An army cannot be commanded by a voice that cannot be heard. A law cannot be enforced by a shout that does not exist. Power devolved instantly to the local level, to whoever possessed the clearest visual signal. The world was breaking apart into tiny, isolated pockets of silent agreement. By hour 44, the physical landscape of the cities began to look noticeably different. The signs of the old world, the advertisements, the logos became meaningless monuments to a dead era of noise. Society was shifting its value from the audible to the visible, from the abstract to the immediate. As the final hours of the second day arrived, the panic began to subside into a deep, heavy exhaustion. Humanity had survived the first shock of the excision. The machinery had stopped, but the pulse remained. The species was learning to breathe in a universe where sound was no longer an option. The 48th hour marked the boundary line between the old memory and the new reality. The grand din of the 20th century was officially dead, buried under 2 days of absolute stillness. Ahead lay 100 years of isolation, a century where every story would have to be written with the eye alone. The age of the ear had ended. The century of the long silence had begun.